Hello and welcome to another lesson in this tutorial. In this lesson we're going to be exploring Sibelius's potential for producing teaching material. And you can see that Sibelius's creators were aware of its potential usefulness to teachers because under the File tab we see an entire category labelled Teaching. And if we open this up, here we can use or create templates for all sorts of educational purposes. However, I'm not going to go through this with you. I'll let you look at these resources for yourself because most of this stuff is pretty self-explanatory. If you're a music teacher and you need some ideas regarding teaching material and you're not looking for something very specific, I think that browsing through the lists of resources here could be quite helpful. But what I'm going to be showing you in this lesson are a couple of techniques which can be used to create your own customized teaching materials. So, first things first, we're going to have to talk about text. So when you're creating teaching material, you'll often need a different text to notation ratio on the page. That is to say, you'll probably need more text and less music notation. In Sibelius, almost all text fields are dependent on a staff. If you want to add text, you're going to need a staff to hang it off of. So what we're going to have to do if we want to add text is to first add an instrument to our empty score. And I'm just going to add a flute. And once I've done that, I can then just hang text and other objects off of that staff as I please. Now, if for some reason I want to have these different objects on a blank page without any music staves, once I've finished adding these objects, I can then change my instrument to a hidden instrument. Now obviously my instrument is still there, the staff is still there, it's just simply hidden, and if I click around in the dark a bit, I should be able to find it. Now the reason that I created a visible staff first and then changed it to a hidden staff is because it makes working on your document a lot easier. You can then see where everything is. Now, of course, an alternative to doing things this way is to create a blank page and add blank page text to that page. The problem, of course, with that is that if you need musical material, for example, notes and rests and rhythms, you can't do that very easily on a blank page. But here, I can still add those objects to the hidden staff. But let's take a step back for the moment and say that I do need a staff. In fact, let's say that I want to create a worksheet where students have to name a set of chords. So again, I'm going to have to start with a single instrument. And I'll probably want to first delete the instrument name and just turn off the bar numbers and all that sort of stuff. Just clean it up so that I literally only have a staff. And now I'm going to add some pitches for my chords. Now the next thing that I'm going to have to do is give the students an instruction as to what to do, and I'm just going to create this using a normal technique text field. Now often when you see this sort of thing in published workbooks, there's often a gap that separates the individual examples. And this is actually quite easy to do in Sibelius. We just select a bar, then open up the inspector window. The hotkey, of course, is Control-Shift-I, and then under bars, you'll see gap before bar. And if I increase this, it creates a gap, and we can control how large that gap should be. So I'll just add that gap to every single bar. And underneath our staff, we're going to have to give our students somewhere to fill out the names of the chords. Now, I would do this using lines. We could use just a normal horizontal line like this, for example, then place and align it under the first chord and then just copy paste, which I mean doesn't look too bad. Or we can use a box, which can also be found under lines. When it comes to creating teaching material, boxes can be incredibly useful and you can find applications for them everywhere. So I now just have to delete the final bar line and we're pretty much done. But there are a couple of additional things that I could do if I wanted to. For example, we could get rid of the additional clefs if you think that they're too distracting by opening up the clefs window. The hotkey is Q and just adding a blank clef. Or, alternatively, if you select a single bar and open up the inspector window, you'll see that there are a whole lot of checkboxes, and you can actually turn clefs off for that bar so that it doesn't display. And here you can also turn on and off the display of the key signature, initial bar line, and the brackets. And likewise, if you don't like these bar lines at the end of your bars and you would like to turn them off or make them all invisible, you can change this in engraving rules. The hotkey, of course, is Ctrl-Shift-E. And in engraving rules, under bar lines, here we can change our default bar lines to invisible. So you can see now that our worksheet is looking just a little bit cleaner. Now, the great thing about being able to add gaps before bars is that by adding additional bars and additional systems and creating different spacing between the bars, these little bar cells don't necessarily have to line up with one another. And so you can make them look as though they're just floating around on the page. The other thing is that you can click and drag the ends of your systems so that they are longer or shorter than the others. Now, for normal scores, I wouldn't suggest you do this because it can lead to a whole lot of really weird looking layout problems, but for worksheets, it's perfectly okay. So now that I've shown you a couple of basic principles regarding creating worksheets, allow me to show you a couple of other techniques that can be quite useful. Sometimes on a worksheet you'll need consecutive blank lines for the students to write on. For example, if the students have to analyze and then write about a short musical excerpt. And the easiest way of creating consecutive lines is by using a text field. So I'm just going to add technique text to my score. But before I add any lines, I'm just going to type some nonsense in so that I can then select the perimeter of the text field and expand it to my desired size. And once I have the desired size of my text field in place, I'm just going to fill my text field with underscores, at first by typing them in, and then of course by copy-pasting them. And you can see that this already looks relatively good, but the distance between the lines is a little bit too small. So to increase the distance between the lines, we have two options. Option number one is to simply increase the font size, but this will of course also increase the thickness of the line. So if you don't want to increase the line thickness as well, option number two is to increase the line spacing. And we do that either in the Edit Text Styles window, or we can do it in the Inspector window. Now, sometimes you'll also need circles for worksheets, and unfortunately there is no circle tool in Sibelius, but we can still create them. We just have to do it via a text style. So I'm first going to open up the Edit Text Styles window, and then I'm going to create a new text style based on something simple like technique text, and I'm going to call it circles. And then, under the Border tab, I'm going to assign this text type a circle-shaped border. Once I've done that, back in the Font tab, I'm going to change my text color to white. So if I now add that new text type to my score, you can see that the border is black, but the text is white, meaning that when we print everything off, you'll only see the circular border. But as I've mentioned before, you just got to make sure that in your printing settings, right down the bottom, print in color is turned on. Otherwise, it's just going to print your white text as normal black text. Now, the great thing about having our circles attached to text fields is that we can just adjust the size of our circles by changing the size of the text field. Do note, however, that if you plan on putting an object in the circle, the white text will likely sit on top, and so under the Appearance tab, you've just got to make sure to send your text to the back of the stack of objects. Now, I'm afraid that if you'd like to do more than this with graphics, you're probably going to have to make the graphics outside of Sibelius and just import them into the program. But this is actually very simple to do. In the Notation tab, you just click Graphic, you then pick a graphic from your computer, open, and you're done. We can then resize the graphic by stretching the edges. And if you would like to resize it in the correct proportions, drag the corners of the image whilst holding down Shift. And if you'd like to rotate it, you can do this in the middle of the image. So with everything that I've shown you over the course of this lesson, you should be able to produce pretty much any sort of worksheet. Worksheets really don't get much more complicated than this. And as I mentioned earlier in the lesson, Sibelius does have a whole lot of ready-made teaching material available, and it's definitely worth checking out if you're a teacher of some kind. But at the end of the day, there's nothing like being able to just whip up your own material. So I hope this has been able to encourage you with that, and I guess I'll catch you in the next lesson.